And we're live. Welcome to Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman, and here we are on this brand new adventure, a podcast. Who would have thought? Worn many hats in my life. As a lawyer, I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years. Was a mayor for 6 years of a great town here in South Florida, Bal Harbor. Written op-eds, been out there, but really the most interesting part of my life are the conversations that I have with people. Nuanced, interesting, friendly conversations with people I agree with and people I don't agree with. And these are discussions that we're not seeing in public discourse, which is why I decided to launch on this adventure. I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to be me. It'll be genuine. And here we are live in Miami, in Wynwood, with the world famous Dave Rubin from the Rubin Report in your house. So
I did build this for you, my friend. I did not know you when we started this thing, but I had a vision in my head that one day someone named Gabe would be in this studio and I would be a guest on their first podcast. You said friendly. We'll see about that.
Well, not friendly. We'll make it more fun for the listeners. So let's do it.
Let's see if we can fight about something,
I was a litigator for 15 years.
Right. I know we agree on a lot of stuff, but let's see what we can do here.
Listen, we made it into the studio, but remember, this is not the first time we met.
No.
And it's interesting that we're here in this studio because when we met is when you were still living in California, looking to see whether you're going to move to Miami to open this exact studio, move your family here to Miami, and here you are. So how's that move been for you?
Oh, the move has been incredible. And actually, if I remember correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong, I was tweeting out something about moving to Miami and I didn't know who you were. You tweeted at me, something, I'm the mayor of Bal Harbor, something. We ended up having lunch and that was when I was looking around trying to figure out where I was going to live. And I kind of looked near you. I was willing to kind of go anywhere because I just wanted to escape the insanity of Los Angeles. That was a little over 2 years ago, about 2 years and a month. And I can tell you that this has been the most fruitful, best 2 years of my life. We also had kids in the midst of that. But being in Florida, a place that values freedom, that lets you live the way you want to live, that feels like it's on the way up. You know, so much of what's happening in America and across the West right now feels like it's going the other way. And when I was in Cali, you know, I was one of the leaders for the recall of Gavin Newsom, and I fought very hard for that. But I constantly felt like I was swimming upstream. And it's like you're swimming upstream, but it's not like a salmon swimming upstream where maybe you're going to make it. If you get past the bear, you maybe make it. This felt like swimming upstream, but just always being pushed back the other way. Where here, I feel like I'm building something. I'm part of something, and I'm very proud of that. So I am here to fight for the free state of Florida, and that's why I moved not only the Rubin Report, but we brought locals here. Obviously, locals eventually merged with Rumble, which is on the other coast in Florida, and there's just incredible opportunity here, and it's very cool to be part of.
It's interesting if you see, like, just yesterday in San Francisco in City Hall, they had a vote to condemn Israel. And what's interesting isn't the vote.
Yes, I have a feeling Israel will go on despite that 8-3 vote by a bunch of like gender queer social justice warriors.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting isn't the vote because, you know, we kind of knew that would happen. But if you heard, there was one guy who spoke, a Jewish guy who got up and spoke and said, look, I don't feel safe in San Francisco. And while he's talking, they're heckling him and saying, you know, screaming anti-Semitic slurs on him. And like, obviously, that's not the only issue, but that's really indicative of how the rest of society is going. And here in South Florida, that would never happen, right? I mean, you go to a city council meeting or any public discourse, sure, there's differing opinions, but we don't have much crazy in South Florida. Well, we have a different kind of crazy, but not that political woke crazy.
Sure. Well, we don't have woke crazy. There's a lot of reasons for it, and it was on its way in many ways. I mean, it really was. It was getting into our schools. It was getting into our institutions. DeSantis did a hell of a lot, I would say more than quite literally anyone in America, to remove it from the structural part of what's going on in government. Hopefully that can be scaled up and can get to the federal government too, but it's at least happening here. But just a couple of weeks ago, I was at an event with the Miami mayor, Mayor Suarez, who's a great guy. I know you guys are friends.
He'll be on Tuesday.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. So, well, he can pick up where I'm going to start this story. But we were at an event together and I was asking him, it was in front of a few people. So I was kind of questioning him about things. And I was asking him about what his governing philosophy is. And he said something that I think is really true and right and how most politicians should operate, which is that he doesn't want the government to be part of everyone's life all the time. And he wants to keep taxes low and regulation out of the way, but that there are appropriate uses of government. We should have clean streets. We shouldn't have homeless people everywhere. You shouldn't have drugs all over the place. You shouldn't have potholes. Like, there are basic things government's supposed to do. And if government does those things trimly and slimly, then people will figure out how to live their lives and live them very freely. I'm in the suburbs in Miami, but the area that I live in, there hasn't been a home break-in in 14 years. One of the first things that I did when I got there was meet the mayor and meet the police chief, because I was like, I want to be in this community. I want people to know that I'm here, or the people that are influential. I want them to know that I'm here because maybe I can help enrich this community. And you see a lot of that in Florida, and I don't think you see that in San Francisco. I know you don't, because most of the functional people of San Francisco have fled the city.
Right. Well, what's interesting is when you have the issues like all the DEI and the different woke agenda items that government somehow has a response to. We talk about how DeSantis has gotten DEI out of schools and he's banned certain books, despite this people calling it "Don't Say Gay," but really just taking out pornography and things of the nature from schools. You know, government's not the answer to everything, right? And we, especially people who are more conservative, like me and you, believe in a much more limited form of government. And also, we know people on the street aren't sitting around wondering, hey, I wonder what my mayor and my governor think about this before making a decision. So it really leads me to this sort of platform. This is episode 1 of a new podcast. It's a form of media that you're very familiar with. What role do you find that this alternative media space plays in shaping public discourse and how people think about things and how people talk about issues?
Well, actually, as of today, as of your launching of this podcast, there are officially more podcasts than people now. That is how it is.
So there's no competition.
There is no you'll be just fine. You'll be fine. No, actually, you will be fine, because even though there are a million podcasts, I mean, I never view anyone in my space, whether it's Joe Rogan or Patrick Bet-David or whoever it might be. Bill Maher has a podcast now. Like, whoever it might be that's doing something roughly similar to me, I never view as competition, because it's like, I'm doing something good. There's a gajillion people out there. If you do something good and you build it and you're honest and forthright and entertaining and have a unique perspective, you'll be just fine. So it's just like, I just don't view it as like a zero-sum game in competition in that sense. I would say the job for anyone that is doing what I suspect you're going to do, which is talk about cultural issues, talk about political issues, things of that nature, is to clean up the mess that the mainstream media has left us with. You know, you turn on CNN, you are not going to hear anything true. You open up the New York Times, you will not see anything true or read anything true. And that's left a lot. It's a damn shame, because we should have an institution, a media institution, or media institutions that tell us something true. You know, back in the day, how old are you?
43.
I was going to say, I think I have a couple of years on you. I'm 47. So, but when we were growing up, you know, you had the 6:30 p.m. nightly news, and it was NBC, CBS, and ABC. And they pretty much talked about the same things for a half hour. Maybe they ordered them slightly differently, but sometimes not. And really, most people just watched one or the other, just depending on whether they happened to like Tom Brokaw more than they liked Peter Jennings or who was the guy on Channel 2. The guy who ended up getting Dan Rather. It was just like, oh, I like that guy's hair more, so I'll watch that channel. That's basically what it was. Now that means that the amount of stuff that we heard about was pretty slim, because they were just corporate news, you know, for 22 minutes covering the same thing at the same time. But the country sort of believed in the same basic ethos. Cable news, internet, everything else over the last 2 decades has completely blown that apart. And now we can't agree on basic facts about anything. I mean, really almost anything. So I think the challenge is, if you care about the truth and you care about honestly debating ideas, how do you do that without losing your mind in a playground that is filled with bad actors, algorithms that we're fighting against, and a whole bunch more? Yeah, I guess I'll ask you that in about a year. We'll see how you're doing.
I think the hard part is that media today, traditional media, I think, has played a big part in what I call the dumbing down of our society.
Oh, yeah.
Everything has to fit in one box or the other. You're pro-choice or you're pro-life, or you're pro-Second Amendment, or you're anti-Second Amendment, or, you know, you hear some elected officials like Trump say, I'm the most Second Amendment, most pro-Second Amendment. It doesn't even mean anything, right? They're just slogans. And, you know, what's interesting is these platforms where you can actually have real discussions on issues, you can actually get into the issues and into the nuance. But I think the problem is, to get the voices heard, sometimes people use the clickbait and the titles on the same exact things, and it risks the same dumbing down of America that traditional media uses.
It's a huge problem, and if you could solve that problem, that'll be great. Because, you know, I can tell you, having been on YouTube for years, and now I'm still on YouTube, but I'm obviously primarily focused on Rumble and Locals. You know, you want to get into the algorithm. The algorithm, you know, picture the algorithm is basically just like a rushing river that's going, and it's got all the information, and people are jumping in at different points. The algorithm enables you to be seen or not seen, and unfortunately, the way way the algorithm works, particularly on YouTube, but Google and all algorithms to a certain extent, they want a certain amount of clickbait. They want a certain amount of nonsense. So there are times when we're doing things where I could say to my guys every morning, I could say to my guys, listen, guys, give this the most straight up title ever, no exaggeration, no whatever. And it's like, even my own audience who subscribes to my shows will not see my videos because the algorithm will not be kind to that. So you have to decide and figure out what the best way to do that is, how to balance being honest and true and good versus there is sort of a duplicitous game out there that has now been gamified.
Everything
and
destroys. Someone destroys someone, right? And then that gets into
and you have to figure out the best way to be able to hopefully build a business, build an audience, and be seen and be found, right? Like you're going to want to be discovered now. That's the purpose of starting a show.
You also want to be trusted, and
but you want to be trusted, right. And that push and pull, that tension, it's a good tension in a way. I think we've managed to do it quite well. But there are times, every now and again, I don't do all the tagging and titling and all that stuff for my videos, but every now and again, something will come across my phone and I'll call my guy and be like, all right, that one it was just unnecessary, or that was a bit much. It's pretty rare that happens. There is just a certain game, and you can either be angry at the game or you can be a player in the game, and you got to just figure out how to do it.
So it's Wednesday, January 10th, I'm pretty sure.
I believe so.
5 days away from Iowa.
Yes.
The first Republican presidential primary. We've both been very active commenting on that, and seen you in some interesting places related to that. And the polling, I looked at it this morning in Iowa, still has Trump at about 52%, Haley and DeSantis at 17% and 16% respectively.
Yeah,
Ramaswamy's like at 6% or so. We're going to find out. But what's your opinion? Do you think the polling is totally wrong and they can't really understand the Iowa caucus process? I was in Iowa twice this summer. I didn't feel those numbers going around at all.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts?
My guess is what you felt was that pretty much everybody supported DeSantis, appreciated Trump, but wanted DeSantis to win, right? Is that the general feeling that you got?
I wore a DeSantis hat in the Iowa State Fair, and I got stopped by absolutely everybody telling me the exact same thing. They love DeSantis. They loved Trump in the past tense, but they don't want him again, and we need to get DeSantis in.
So that's what I hear everywhere that I go. Everywhere that I go. Now, I know my audience. Obviously, I very publicly moved to Florida, as we talk about, and I've done plenty of events with DeSantis, and I'm publicly supporting DeSantis, so I understand that the average person that might come up to me at Whole Foods, it's a self-selected group of people. But everywhere I go across the country, I hear the exact same thing from people, which is exactly what you just said right there. It's not that people hate Trump. I think they're a little tired of some of the games and some of the loose language or whatever, but it's more so they just think, oh, this is a better, younger version who's ready to do it with an incredible track record, who actually is more conservative. And on some of the things, he's actually more conservative than I am. But I do hear that consistently. So on one hand, I would say the polls are complete nonsense. On the other hand, the discrepancy of the polls seems so wide, right? It's not like a 6-point gap or an 8-point gap. It seems to be like a 40-point gap. What I would say is this, and we shall see on Monday. Caucuses are different than just going in and pulling a lever for somebody. In the caucus, as you know, you're in a gymnasium or you're in a library or in some big building where you're convincing people where to go. I mean, physically, you're moving people to different areas to collect votes. You could change your mind on the fly, and there will be people that do that. So I suspect that is going to play well for DeSantis. I think the DeSantis people will be better at getting into a room with people, explaining and laying out the case for him, laying out a clean track record, all of the things that he's done consistently well. I think
and they've been working on it. I mean, they've been in Iowa, the DeSantis
99 counties. They've done everything you can do. Look, it may just be that Trump is unbeatable in a Republican primary, that the base is so strong and they don't care what he says or what he does, that they're just with him. They feel like this is that this is the story doesn't end right. If he gets taken out by a Republican, he has to become president again. I can accept all of those things, whether I agree with them or not. I can accept them all sort of psychologically, right? It's just very obvious to me that DeSantis is the best candidate to get us out of this. I've never seen a politician in my life that has said, these are the things I'm going to do, gone ahead and done them, and then said, okay, now I'm going to do these things, gone ahead and done them. Everything that everyone else talks about are the things that he's accomplished here in Florida. This is our chance. And he's also a good man. He's right between our ages. He's 45, I think. He has 3 kids, good wife, just like an impeccable record as a human being, lawyer, military guy. it's not going to get better than this. And I don't worship politicians, so I don't mean that in like, oh, worship you kind of way. I mean it is like, this guy is a good public servant. And if we don't choose him, I think we're going to be in a lot of trouble, regardless of whether Trump ends up president or Biden or whoever they replace Biden with.
Yeah, 2 points. One is, when you talk about DeSantis and doing what he says, it's interesting because if you look at the last legislative session in Florida last year, he passed an agenda that no one's ever passed anything near the size of that. But really what it was all the things he said he was going to do. And it was weird in a way. People didn't know how to react to it because he actually did all the things he was going to do. He said he was going to do. And it was a lot, right? It was a lot to deal with.
Are you more of a basketball guy or a baseball guy?
Basketball.
You're a basketball guy? Okay, so what I've been saying about DeSantis is he has Tim Duncan syndrome. And Tim Duncan syndrome is that
the corner jump shot.
Well, he had a nice back. Yes, exactly, a nice bank shot. No, the Tim Duncan syndrome is that Tim Duncan, 5-time NBA champion, MVP a couple times, finals MVP a couple times, was not flashy. Can you think of like 3 Tim Duncan highlights? You can't. You can think about him banking a jumper. Nobody remembers that, right? Now, he played at the same time as Kobe, won as many championships as Kobe, but Kobe was the star, right? Kobe was the Michael Jordan. Everyone talked about him. That's the Trump thing. Duncan just quietly went about his business. Even when Duncan retired, nobody really knew he was going to retire. Remember, Kobe had a year where every game was his last game, and it was a big show. But I think what that means is that people get sort of not tired of it. They get almost lost by the fact that there's someone out there doing so much good work. You take it for granted. And I think that that's been one of the challenges for DeSantis. I think there were a couple challenges here. One, how do you defeat Trump in and of itself is just like a riddle that nobody has answered yet. The second one is if you're just doing what is good and what is right, and every night you put up 25 points and 12 rebounds and 3 assists and shoot 55, it's like, that is unbelievable. But when you've done it 20 games in a row and you win MVP and people are just like, oh, that's what we expect out of him. You just want, and then you're looking at the flashy thing instead of that. So I think he's suffering from a little bit of Tim Duncan syndrome. We just expect greatness. He gives us greatness and we just forget about it. But you could do a Tony Gwynn version of it if you were a baseball guy.
Definitely not a baseball guy.
Okay.
My family's from Argentina. Yeah. We do soccer and basketball.
Fair enough.
Maybe some football. But what's interesting is that's the $1 million question for DeSantis and for the voters, the American voters, at least the primary voters, right? You have someone who's not flashy, who's not Trump, right? He's not a social media star, not even a media star at all, right? He's just a guy who does the work, and policy-wise, you look at him, if you're a substantive person, you're going to like him. Whether that's enough to win an election, I don't know if that's a fair question either when Trump's in the race, because Trump, the laws of gravity don't seem to apply to him.
Right.
And we haven't even spoken about, what happens with these cases with him and how that affects the race moving forward with Trump. That's a whole other discussion. But, the voters in Iowa at least, and then after, New Hampshire, South Carolina, et cetera, are going to have to look at that and see it, weigh all of that together and make their decision. From my perspective, the polls have to be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Whether DeSantis wins or not, I don't know, but I think he's going to have a really strong showing. And I think then the big question is, what effect is winning or having a strong showing in Iowa going to have on the other states?
Right. That's what I keep saying on my show, because I think you have 5 days in between the Iowa caucus and New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, and then South Carolina is right after that. So you have like a 5-day window. Let's say DeSantis actually does win the caucus. Well, then the whole script is flipped overnight. Like, it's literally shredded up, because it's like, well, wait a minute. We were told he doesn't have to debate and he's up by 50 points, but DeSantis just won this. People will see blood in the water. And once they see that, then a whole bunch of other people in other states that are feeling what we've just described here, like, oh, I respect Trump, I thank Trump, but I'm ready for DeSantis, they might start getting more vocal. Now, the question is, what will Trump do at that point? What does he have in his pocket? Because he has something in his pocket. I would also argue that the mainstream media desperately wants Trump to be the nominee because he's far more beatable than DeSantis is, because there's no new Trump voter. We just know that. There are people that are tired of Trump, but Trump's not bringing in new voters. DeSantis, we know he brings in new voters, because look what just happened here in Florida. Everywhere I walk around, I'm walking my dog, everybody comes up to me. They tell me I'm new from California, I'm new from New York, I'm new from Connecticut. By the way, I was a lifelong Democrat, and they're the most hardcore Republicans here.
And they hate him, but they'll still vote for him. Because their life is so much better. Even if they don't like DeSantis and the socialists, they'll still vote for him.
Exactly. They struggle. I find generally the lefties that move here struggle a bit more with his stance on abortion. And actually, my personal preference, I was fine with the 15 weeks that Florida had. He's now moved it to the heartbeat bill at 6. It's his right as the governor to make that change. That's the one that the generally more liberal people struggle with, I think, more than anything else. But I think people have realized, well, in some ways, let's say, the price you have to pay to be in a conservative state where things are actually going to be functional. So it's going to be an interesting 5 days between but look, if it doesn't happen, if Trump just blows it out in Iowa, then I don't see how you can make a case, unfortunately, for DeSantis going forward, because he's not going to do particularly well in New Hampshire, I don't think. And then South Carolina, Nikki was the governor there. So then it starts getting complex after that.
Yeah, I mean, the laws of gravity would say that if DeSantis wins in Iowa, it'll flip the script. But we haven't seen those laws of gravity really apply to Trump.
Indeed.
Let's just shift to the last thing. Last time, not the last time I saw you, but I saw you in last summer, actually in Jerusalem, standing in front of the Western Wall. We bumped into each other, maybe intentionally, gave you a little bump. But I saw you there. It was kind of a different world when we saw each other there. It was a happy, calm time. I was just there a month ago. Obviously, it's a wartime. I know it wasn't your first time in Israel, but how did being there on the ground so recently affect the way you're looking at the war and watching the news of everything that's happening in Israel?
My main takeaway, I think we saw each other there in May, and my main takeaway, we were there for about 11 days, and we did 5 days in Jerusalem, and I had never done that much time in Jerusalem. Every time, I've been to Israel maybe a half dozen times in my life, but when I've done Jerusalem, it's just been, 2-day trips here and there. But this was 5 days there with tour guides really going through the history and going into Judea and Samaria and all of that, which is not really the West Bank. That's a made-up term. I know you know that and whatever else, but okay. My main takeaway was how peaceful everything was. I could not believe it. It felt there was such a sense of peace in Jerusalem, but in Tel Aviv and the rest of Israel as well, of calmness, of, back in the day, going to Israel, there used to be soldiers everywhere, on the streets everywhere. I suspect there's some more soldiers on the streets now, especially in certain areas. But even in Jerusalem, there were very few soldiers. There were very few police. Now, I know they've got a whole bunch of cameras and digital stuff. And I chatted in Jerusalem with Ambassador David Friedman. I think I might have been with him when I saw you. And he was talking about some of the ways they've changed security over time. But it felt good and normal and decent and pleasant. And I suppose that if the Israelis they'll obviously do a postmortem on this thing once the war is over, although I don't think it's going to be over for probably a year or so. I think they probably grew a little fat on the success of the country. The last 20 years of Israel, despite, little wars every couple of years, were unbelievably successful, and they became an unbelievably powerful country. And I think they started to think, we're kind of like every other country, and maybe we can let our guard down a little bit. Now, some of this is obviously circumspect, and we don't know exactly what happened at the border that day and a whole bunch more. But I think the real saving grace for Israel is that it's baked into the code. Every freaking holiday that Jews have. What's the holiday about? I don't have to tell you. You've got a yarmulke on your head. Every holiday is, somebody came in, they tried to kill a whole bunch of us. They did kill a decent amount of us, but we survived. Let's eat. And so the survival part is baked into the code. So some of the bad stuff is there too. And in no way does that diminish anything that happened, obviously. And that's still happening right now. But they're strong and they'll survive. And I suspect they're going to get an unbelievable generation of leaders to come out of this thing. Guys that are in their 20s now, and girls probably, who are in their 20s now, who are in Gaza fighting for the survival of their nation, who will be better leaders than Israel has had over the last 20 years. And that's not a shot at Bibi or anyone else, but I think just like a new generation, which in many ways is exactly what we need right here, which could sort of connect us to what we were previously talking about.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, the sense of security that you felt then, and, I'm in Israel all the time, multiple times a year. I work with Israeli companies. I come back and forth whenever I can. But that sense of security is lost right now, which is this, you feel the tension in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, wherever you are. But at the same time, there was a lot of discord in society, a big division over the judicial reforms, which continued, by the way, during the war. The court still made a ruling on it to continue to reverse what the parliament, what the Knesset did there. But what you're saying is absolutely true, because this younger generation now, and it's not just the 20-year-olds, because the 300,000 reservists were called up. So everyone who served was serving again together, and the magic of serving together. We don't have conscription here in the United States, but you're sitting in a tank with someone. You don't care if they're right wing or left wing or who they voted for. You have a common purpose, and you're rowing in the same direction. And when the war is over, I also suspect that generation of people are going to really be part of the rebuilding of that sense of security and the rest of the state of Israel. And I think it's so important here in the U.S. People have to start understanding to see, that what's happening here in the U.S. when you see all these protests against Israel, it's not just against Israel, it's against the United States. They're burning American flags in New York and Chicago and Philadelphia. And people are getting confused about that, and I think that's also a critical topic.
Yeah, well, as a few people have said, I've quoted them on Twitter, they start with the Saturday people and then they come for the Sunday people. I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you think that these people that are chanting river to the sea and closing our bridges and all of these things, let's say Israel just folded tomorrow. So Holocaust 2, Israel folds tomorrow. Do you think that they suddenly would be like, okay, guys, we're good, let's wrap it up and go home? No, now... We talked about blood in the water before. Now there's serious blood in the water, and the next aim really will be America more than anything else. Because if you think the Jews have nothing to do with the ancient land of Israel, wait till you find out what Americans are doing in the land of North America, which, by the way, is completely just and everything else. I'm just using their nonsensical logic. It's not even logic. So there's a much bigger problem within Western society. I think most Western European nations are realizing that they've got a whole series of problems now because they have people calling for jihad on their streets, and they're not so thrilled with the way the average person in Paris or London wants to live either. So again, it has very little to do with the Jews.
Yeah, it turns out when you come up with these policies that sound nice in a vacuum, they apply. You want to just have open borders. You see what happened in Europe, and now they're dealing with that, and they're going to have to deal with that for generations to come.
Isn't it nice that Florida has basically three borders of water, and then we got something with Georgia, and I guess a little bit with Louisiana. We can close up shop pretty easily here, which is nice. And look, if DeSantis does not become president and he becomes governor, and we get another Democrat administration to just keep allowing these people in, let's dig a moat, put some gators in it, and see what happens.
Look, the bottom line is we've got a lot of work to do, not just in politics, but in public discourse and pushing things together, which is why we're here. So really want to just thank you for being here. Episode 1, I couldn't think of a better guest, and I'm really just honored that you would join me here. I know it's your studio, but thank you. It's been great to become friends with you as you've come to Miami and watch everything you're doing. I'm excited to be part of the family.
And I'll give people a little insider information. I think at my holiday party a couple of weeks ago, I was pretty wasted, and you're very you don't get that wasted. You're very.
Let's be honest. You were home.
It's true.
You were
it's true.
All you had to do was fumble to your house. You live like an hour away from where I live, and I still had to go out and drive home.
Good times. That's all I'm saying.
We'll do it again over tequila, and I'll drink as much as you will.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for your support.